Against, that's carried. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
And carry on. Look, if possible, Peter, could I get you up for the next one? Just because I think we're in that...
Oh, I beg your pardon?
No, Peter Ryan.
Oh.
Just because we're in that conversation, talking about the LTP, and I thought it'd be quite good just to do this one,
No worries.
given that people are thinking about this stuff.
Okay. Right, what you see here is the first version of a program plan for the long-term plan 2021. It's built on the same kind of model that's used by the other major metropolitan cities, in that it sets out what you would expect to see in a program plan. In other words, governance and scope of decisions, also the focus of the plan, and there are some differences with this one, noticeably the strategic directions that Council has built, as well as a desire to incorporate resilience in the plan. It also incorporates risks and milestones and reporting and all of those other factors. Now, it is a long document, and I'm going to seek some guidance from the Chair on how deeply you'd like me to go into this. If you'd like a 5-minute run through, if you'd like me to go a bit deeper, how
No,
far?
I think 5 minutes max, because I presume people have read it. I think that, in a way, a good place to start is the map on page 123 in terms of how this thing is going to work. But yeah, I mean...
Okay. Well, look, just briefly before I go to 123, I'd like to just point to the diagram on page 119, which is the development framework. This is a really simple and quite simplistic way of understanding how the process will work. Essentially, the difference between this and 2018 is to try to factor the strategic directions, the resilience theme, and any material from service delivery reviews into the beginning of the plan, so the entry end of the pipe, rather than trying to pass a quick lens over it at the end. So in other words, when you build activity plans, when you build asset plans, they're built with a view to resilience and those kind of factors. You can't superficially impose it at the end. So that's a measured sort of approach. There is time to do that. There are the mechanisms to do that. It just requires focus to do that. So moving now to the fairly busy slide on page 123. Look, I'll summarise this by saying the aim here is to go a bit, well, substantially earlier than before, to build the underlying plans like the asset plans, the activity management plans, levels of service, all of that kind of thing. It's for that to be built, if you like, long and slow, well out from the decision-making period, so you've got time to actually go through them and consider them. The thing to avoid is all of that stuff avalanching on you in the last 3 or 4 months of the process, so that you basically need to spend all day, every day going through it. If it can be built and you can go through it at a measured rate, then that enables you to really drive the quality up. So the way that plays out is to do a lot of the work, bearing in mind that we have to do annual plans as well, or at least one annual plan as well, during this process. That plays out as getting approval for the process early, commencing the build of asset plans, activity plans, revising levels of service, service delivery reviews, if and how they apply, to do all of that starting now. The aim, and I'm not going into the detail, the aim is to have all of those ingredients built for June of next year, so that you've basically got, if you like, the shell or version 1.0 of a draft LTP in the middle of next year, which then leaves a full year for Council to consider those ingredients and how they relate to each other. So little bits often, rather than an avalanche in October, November at the crunch point. There obviously will be a need to look hard at our environment at the start of the process. So basically, and the timing is up for grabs, but the election is a good trigger point for Council to consider the environment in terms of its environmental scan, what's going on out there. And I mean, some of the census data is going to be a bit flaky because of the way that was handled. But what is happening around the city? What's the environment we're operating in? And stepping outside the dry process side of it, a chance to present councillors with a view to build a plan that is a bit beyond earthquakes and into what should the city look like in the long term. So regular reporting back to the committee on progress, and an approach that basically brings you detail little and often. That's the 5-minute view of it. I mean, I'm happy to. I should point out that while this process has been through the executive team and it's been extensively workshopped, the interrelationships between things, like for example the finance strategy and the infrastructure strategy, they're too complex to represent here. So there's going to be some discussion needed as we go on of what is basically a blueprint and exactly how that plays out in real life. But as a way of understanding the phasing of be ready, build, land the build by June next year, and then have a year to think about the relationships and the detail. That's the guts of it.
Could I make 2 suggestions or discussion, items for discussion? Obviously, there's a new council which will arrive mid-October. From memory, the first meeting's generally not till beginning of November. Would it make sense to set aside a couple of days, maybe at the end of November in the calendar now, for the new council to come in and immediately look at the big macro picture of the LTP, check the strategic directions, understand what the major drivers are, and just spend a couple of days really workshopping this stuff, which means you're really drawing a line under this right away. So that's one thing to think about. The other one, which I don't know whether it's possible, but I think it is, and that is actually not to have an annual plan consultation process in 2020, but use that time to go out and engage with the community a year in advance of the normal LTP engagement. So you go out to them, so you don't do, because the annual plan will be pretty much like this one, but you actually go out and you talk to them about the LTP. So rather than waiting till you send them a draft LTP for discussion, actually go out and say, these are the big issues, these are the things we want to discuss with you as a community, we want to hear your priorities, we want to get your feedback. Now, if you do that instead of, annual plan stuff, you might get a good steer from the community, which then feeds into the draft long-term plan.
That's certainly possible, and it would it would divert a lot of resources towards the LTP if you weren't doing an annual plan. The only thing is, of course, not doing an annual plan is provisional on not triggering an annual plan. So,
because I know Selwyn, I'm not doing one this time.
Yeah,
so we could have probably got away without doing one this time, I reckon. Yeah. And you still have your annual plan, but in terms of where you put your resources around consultation,
yes,
you do it very differently.
What's the threshold for triggering one?
Yeah, well, that's the question.
You have to do an annual plan. It's
but in terms of consulting,
substantially different from
like in a legal colleague over here will be able to answer more clearly. But basically, if you're not making significant changes, major levels of service, things like that, you're not always triggered into consulting on an annual plan.
So anyway, you are going to consult, but you're going to consult on the LTP as opposed to the. Anyway, it's just something to think about. You don't have to make a decision on it.
Especially if it eases the burden.
Vicky and Dion.
And the strategic directions. There's as you're aware from the last council meeting, the people who wanted to Extinction Rebellion are coming to Innovation and Sustainability. It's likely that from there, that committee may ask the council to declare a climate emergency and to create climate change as the overarching objective of the council. So just as a heads up, that may well come in like the next month or so, and since it's not actually there, which it really should be, and since nobody understands the words resilience, it would be really good to have, except for 3, it would be good to have an awareness of that possibility.
Understood.
Dion?
Yeah, thanks for the report. It's good to see we're
thinking ahead on this, but there's one thing that keeps bugging me is I don't know what SOLG
Sorry,
Solgan is.
Society of Local Government Managers. It's basically
okay.
good guidance people.
They used to give us diaries.
I need a book.
You're not on it, don't worry.
Sorry.
No, I know, but it's referenced so many times in the thing, and I was like, what does it mean?
Sorry.
I even Googled it, and it didn't come up in
You don't
Google.
need to go there.
There's a glossary for the reports. With
No, I even Googled it, and it wasn't in Google.
That's my mistake for allowing the acronym. Sorry about that.
Okay,
Brilliant,
Andrew.
thank you.
Thank you very much. There's a lot of good stuff in here, and I'll comment on that shortly. But late 2020, we've got peer review, which again is good to see as a part of the process. In previous long-term plans, we've had involvement from the Mayor's external advisory group, and I'm not seeing that specifically called out in this plan. Is that because that's picked up in that peer review, or because it's something that's seen as a decision for governors to make, and if we decided to do that again, it would be woven into this, rather than something that staff would recommend?
I think it's a decision for governors to make.
Jimmy?
I'm particularly concerned because the next long-term plan from the 2021 to 31, the key kind of the strategic framework should be the review and establish first, because all those key strategic framework, for instance, whether our vision been slightly changed or not, for the new council or our community outcome or strategic priority, etc. If this one has been changed, probably all our long-term plan, need to be follow all those one, rather than just a program plan in here, or focus on overarching the principle. This is my concern.
Look, I'm not sure if I've got this right, but I'm working on Raf's comments here that if the new council were to workshop its approach to the LTP and confirm the strategic directions, confirm the community outcomes, because not everything is covered by strategic direction, that sets the DNA for the long-term plan in the way that the new council wants it to be. So I would imagine that workshop would be the moment when you would make sure that the DNA is right before too many cogs and wheels turn. Is that through the chair? Is that what you are?
Yes, yeah, that's fine. Okay, thanks, Jimmy. Yanni?
It seems to me that we've still got a huge information gap around our asset management. So it's quite hard for people to have input without knowing asset condition. So I'm just not quite sure how, in 2019, the asset plans, how that aligns to us actually being in receipt of that information.
Well, the top stream of the work streams here is around asset plans, and I think, as you just heard from Pierce, there's a huge amount of work going on to get asset condition and asset plans straightened out. This is occurring very early in the process. You can see the bulk of it is happening in 2019 in order to be ready for an infrastructure strategy and so forth.
Right.
And look, we're working closely with the asset team, and I'm confident that we're seeing a degree of focus and concentration that we haven't seen before. So, look, I'm not saying that the numbers exist now or the asset condition is perfectly defined now, but the work to make that happen is definitely happening.
Right. So by when that asset information work has kind of got to a point where the information is robust enough to inform LTP,
yes,
it wouldn't need to be done in the second quarter of this year, would it? It's basically getting the models in place so that when we do get that information, it can fit in to inform.
If you go to the second column, you'll see a milestone there, asset plans presented to Council January to May 2020.
Right.
So in other words, the work of the next 6 months will come to you after the new year to start going through the asset plans and critiquing them and determining whether you like what you see or not. Now, that's actually never happened before. to date, no council has been through an asset plan as part of the LTP.
Okay.
So that's one of the fundamental shifts from previous processes.
I welcome that. I just wonder if, obviously, January and February, nothing much tends to happen, then you've got not very much time. But I think the key thing is there's a lot of work underway on it, and we'll be relatively informed, if not fully informed, by mid next year on that.
Well, that's the intention.
Okay, great. The two other things, the community board consultation, it's quite frustrating. We've had a number of community boards come through this year's annual plan process with questions and issues that could have possibly been resolved ahead of the process. So I just wondered, in terms of if there's any reflection on sort of lessons learned, or ways in which we can engage the community boards more meaningfully and with more information, so that their submissions or their input is really a lot more valid.
That's a fair point. Obviously, as what is meant to be a one-page roadmap, it can't really cover everything. At the moment, we've got engagement with the boards from October of 2020, but there is obviously scope to do earlier engagement as well.
Yeah.
And that's something that I might talk to John Filsell about, and
Okay.
look at different options there on how we could do that.
I think the boards would appreciate being involved in the asset plans, and I mean, a lot of the stuff that they're raising are like little local assets that they have no visibility of. So I think that's really important.
So perhaps the asset plans presented to council, that could go a bit wider.
Yeah.
In the early part of next year.
But I think the key is really, when we meet with community boards, is how the information, the feedback and the questions that they're posing is captured and responded to inform their submissions.
Yep.
What we tend to do is have workshops, a whole bunch of information gets raised, not very much of it seems to get responded to, and then they come along through the submission process and say, why hasn't X, Y, Z happened? So, and just the final question I have was in regards to, in the summary on page 119, it talks a lot about, it's got the financial strategy, infrastructure strategy, LTP documents, consultation documents, activity plan. The thing that seems to be missing is council's policies and strategies. And I'm just really mindful that we're currently embarking on a huge number of strategies that all hopefully are going to have some sort of action plan. But the relationship between budget and strategy isn't very clear to me. And I just don't know if actually what we're doing is creating a huge expectation around things that are going to happen without really understanding what the budget implications are. And that's, I guess the ones that we're doing, the arts strategy is one, we've just done a heritage one, there'll be a big water one. So can you just talk through the process to sort of incorporate those wider council strategies, action plans, implementation plans, or whatever they want to call them, into this kind of process?
We're on page 119 there, where you see asset and activity plans. Those are the mechanisms by which strategies are actually implemented. So in other words, levels of service, budgets, capital projects, the actual cogs that make something go find themselves there as the building blocks of the LTP. So an asset plan, a service plan will say, what are you trying to achieve here? What are the outcomes you're looking for? Strategic directions, community outcomes, and the strategies that inform this activity. So if an activity has a strategy, that should be part of the building of that plan.
So
and
what we're doing now, though, is we're developing high-level strategy frameworks without the action plan, and then we're going to have another process to develop the action plan. And
well, actually, to be fair, I think most strategies in recent years have had pretty good operational detail about how they'll be operationalised. It's some of the older ones where they tend to be quite high level, but with scant detail on budgets and projects and initiatives.
Yeah, I might.
The newer ones are a bit stronger in that respect.
If you look at the arts one that we just had a workshop on, it's got some quite high level commitments to doing things, setting up an agency, but it's got no financial information at all.
Well, but the activity plans do, and that's where you would find what are we actually going to do. But you need time to go through those activity plans to be certain that those options, those concrete actions, are the ones you want.
Yeah, and I think this is the point that you're kind of raising. Like, we do an annual plan, but then we've got this community engagement, and we've got a whole bunch of different ways in which we're engaging people about priorities that's not necessarily aligned to our budget process. So I just think it needs some thought.
The service plans are the place where, activity plans are the place where you see the outcomes, the strategic directions, the levels of service, the budget, how they're funded, the way the assets are managed. It's where you see the complete package for the activity.
They're not the things that we consult communities on when we're developing strategies, which seems to me the huge gap.
Okay.
Did anyone else have a question? Right, okay, look, thanks very much, Peter. That's good to get that up front. And if you could give some consideration to hitting the ground running with the new council, I think that would be very helpful. Question? Yeah.
I'm happy to move this.
Okay, yeah.
But I'd like to move a couple of additional clauses if I can as
Sure.
well. The first one being that the committee requests this report be added as a standing item at each committee meeting so that we're getting regular updates. And the second of which reflects, Raf, the comment that you just made, requests staff to plan a workshop for the new council as soon as possible after the election.
Okay. Well, it doesn't necessarily have to have a report, but it's there as a standing item.
Yeah. Yeah,
If there is any report.
indeed.
Right.
This is a standing item, yeah, to have a report.
Can we stop calling it Committee of the Whole? Can't we just call it the Finance and Performance Committee? Yeah, we can do it. Okay, and what was the last one?
That staff schedule a workshop.
Yes. I think that would be very good.
Schedule an LTP workshop. For the new council as soon as possible after the election.
The purpose of the workshop is to confirm the program. I mean, to get ready for, I mean, that's.
Well, I think it's to confirm the plan, but also the strategic directions.
Yeah.
So maybe we should say that to confirm the.
Strategic directions and.
Yeah.
Or, yeah. I mean, the workshop won't confirm it, but just.
Confirm
to
the
get
program and
Yeah.
strategic directions. Yeah.
The program.
Yeah, the
Programme,
program.
I think it's good just to lock both of those things in.
Okay. Cool.
We're
Happy with
not,
that? Okay, so
by
that's
doing that, can I just clarify, we're not adopting the priorities set in this, at this meeting, are we?
The report that I've put up is a process-driven
Process,
report,
yeah.
not
So
content.
you're talking about the process rather than
yeah,
the
so
priorities.
there's
that
the
are-
program
That's
and then
cool.
there's the directions. Yeah.
Thank you.
Do I have a seconder for this? Seconded Jimmy. Any debate? Andrew?
I like this, and I like the fact that we're having this conversation now. It's good that we're going early, and we're proposing to continue to go early. It's good to see that we've got a plan which is influenced by the strategic considerations that it should be influenced by up front. It's good to see reinstatement of a good service plan and level of service review process. And as we heard in considerations around item 9 today, a proper set of asset management plans proposed to be in place as well, so that the LTP can be properly informed by those. I referred to the external advisory group in my question. I think we should consider the value that that group has provided in the past and whether it should be reinstated as part of the 2021 process. I think the other thing that's worth noting is that this committee is the committee that needs to drive the long-term plan, realising it's the role of the Mayor to lead the LTP development. This committee has got the term of reference that supports the Mayor in doing that, and that's really the thinking behind that second recommendation I put up there, so that we're across the process and the development of the plan at every stage, and that there can be a good level of governance input both formally and informally as we move forward. So having that standing item there will allow us to do that and really reflect that this is one of the most important pieces of work of the council, and quite possibly the most important piece of work of this committee, both pre and post-election. And absolutely agree with Raf that a detailed workshop of the matters that are important in the LTP for the new council is important if we're going to keep to the timelines, given that there will be a new council after the elections in October. So, the headline for me is that I'm pleased to see a quality piece of work presented to us so early in the process that really addresses a number of the things that we talked about as we went through the 2018 LTP. So, thank you to everybody that's been involved in that.
Anyone else? Look, I agree with what Andrew has said. I think the real opportunity here is to get going early, and then, use whatever tools we've got or will have to engage with the public in a very different way to how we have done in the past. So that's my hope.
Understood.
It won't be here, but I hope it happens. Okay, I'll put the motion. All in favour say aye. Aye. Against. That's carried.